Hi boys and girls, this morning I'm going to model for you Unit 12, Lesson 7, and it has the same objective as yesterday. So today I will measure lengths of objects using a ruler and use data to create a line plot graph. So if we remember from yesterday, wherever we're creating a line plot, every line plot needs to have a title. It needs to have a scale, which shows us our different markings. And in this case, it's the length of the pencils in inches, and then our data. So we're going to be finding data today by measuring different objects, and we are measuring to the nearest quarter inch or 1/4 inch, which you're a little bit more familiar with. So if we look at what we're doing today, we're going to be measuring pens. And I have my ruler right here. And yesterday we talked about how on our ruler, if I zoom in, you see that it's partitioned into fourths or quarters. Remember, fourths and quarters are the same thing, just a different way to say it. So I have my fourths here. So if I look at my first tick mark, I'm at 0 inches. And then I have 1/4 of an inch, 2/4 of an inch, or 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and 1 inch, okay? Now, when we're using a ruler to measure, we just start over. So we start at 1 inch and 1/4, 1 inch and 2/4, 1 inch and 3/4, 2 inches, 2 and 1/4 inches, 2 and 2/4 inches, or 2.5 inches, okay, 2 and 3/4 inches, 3 inches, and so on and so forth. All right? So let's look at what we have here today. It says measure the length of each marker and record the data on the next page. So we're going to go ahead and look here. And really quick, I want to say that when I was looking at what you posted on Seesaw yesterday, I know this is your first time doing this. I'm really proud of you. But I did notice some errors, and a lot of errors were with your measurements. And I think that what a lot of us are doing is that we're not starting right at the 0. Okay, so even if you have your ruler and you see this little extra part here, okay, we're not going to start at the very, very beginning of our ruler. Every ruler is different, but it's always the same rule. We always start at 0, okay? So I want you to go back and double check your measurements after this. So this first marker, you can see, is exactly 5 inches. My next marker is right here. So I have 3. I'm in the 3 zone, 3-inch zone. 3 and 1/4, 3 and 2/4. Okay, and I know that 3 and 2/4 is the same as 3 and 1/2 inches. I want you to become familiar with that because that's what we see when we're measuring. That's usually the fraction that we use. This marker, if I look, we're right at my 3 and 1/4, 3.5, 3 and 3/4 inches. My next marker, I'm right at 2 and 1/4, 2.5, 2 and 3/4 inches. My next marker, I'm at 3 and 1/4, 3.5, 3 and 3/4 inches. My next marker, I'm at 2 and 1/4, 2.5, 2 and 3/4 inches. 2 more to go. I'm right exactly at 4 inches. And last but not least, I am at 2 and 1/4, 2 and 2/4, or a half, 2 and 3/4 inches. Okay. So if I turn the page, it says measure the length of each marker to the nearest inch, which we did, and then record our data. Okay. So marker number 1 was 5 inches. We have 3.5 inches, 3 and 3/4 inches. Notice how I'm putting my unit on every one. 2 and 3/4 inches, 3 and 3/4 inches, 2 and 3/4 inches, 4 inches, and 2 and 3/4 inches. Okay. So once I am done, it says use the data to find an appropriate scale and create a line plot. Okay, so yesterday right here, we had what looked similar. We still had the way that we set up our line plot, but the scale isn't there for us. Okay, yesterday it was there, today it's not. So we had to figure out what measurements are we going to put under each of these tick marks so that we can plot our data. But before we do that, we need to have a title. So the title I'm going to have for my line plot is number of markers measured. So number of markers measured, because that's exactly what I was finding. Okay. My scale is going to be called the length of markers. And I'm going to put in parentheses in inches so that everyone knows that we're working with inches. Okay, and now we need to fill out our scale. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look and we're going to find which marker was the shortest and which marker was the longest in inches. So if I'm looking through, I can see that my shortest marker is 2 3/4 inches, and my longest marker was 5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start my scale at 2 3/4 inches since that's my shortest. And I'm going to end my scale at 5 inches since that was my longest. Okay? So I have 2 3/4. And then you kind of have to think for a second because, what comes next? Well, we know that we're measuring by the nearest 1/4 inch or nearest 1/4 inch. So if you're not sure what comes next, if you're not sure how to continue to go up by fourths, let's just look at our ruler. And you see if I zoom in right here that I have 2 3/4 right here. So what's my next 1/4 inch land on? It lands on 3 inches. And then I'm going to keep going from there. So 3 inches, 3 1/4 inches, 3 2/4 inches or 1/2, 3 3/4 inches, 4 inches, 4 1/4, 4 2/4, 4 3/4, and look at, I land right at 5 inches perfectly. Here, I'll zoom in, sorry, so that you can see. Okay, let's begin a plot. 1 is 5 inches. I'm going to check that and put an X. Number 2 is 3 1/2. I'm going to check it and put an X. Number 3 is 3 3/4. 4 is 2 3/4. My shortest. Another 2 3/4. Or sorry, 3 3/4. Another 2 3/4. Marker number 7 was 4 inches. And marker number 8 was 2 3/4 inches. Okay? So if I look at this, I would read this and say there are 3 markers that measure 2 3/4 inches. There were 0 markers that measure 3 or 3 1/4 inches. There was 1 that was 3 1/2 inches. There were 2 that were 3 3/4 inches. There was 1 marker that was 4 inches. There was 1 marker that was 5 inches, and no markers that fell in between. Okay? So you're going to go ahead and measure your toothbrushes and measure your hammers on your own. Remember to measure carefully, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and meet me at 10 a.m. in our Zoom meeting for my office hours. Okay, good luck, have fun, and looking forward to hearing from you soon.